How can this be since I have no relations with man? May 26, 2025. There are a few occasions in my teaching life that I would categorize as colossal moments. Earning my bachelor's degree, I was the first in my family to receive a university degree. Walking the aisle to accept my PhD in 2015, publishing my first peer-reviewed research, and my first book were all monumental. Not everybody does these things. Perhaps the biggest event every teacher eventually shares is their retirement. For some, this moment comes after a year or two and is just a springboard to other work. For others, it comes after a decade or more and then ends when a different path is taken. And for still others, it comes after decades and is cause for celebration. It is at this moment that a signature is placed at the end of the metaphoric letter. Stamps are licked and one's life work is placed in a mailbox, never to be seen again. At this point, reflective teachers ask themselves if the message they sent was a worthy effort. At the beginning of my career, I had little idea of what qualities made a great teacher, though I had been blessed with a few. Despite having written a philosophical statement, I held to few principles in teaching, and even those I would eventually revisit and modify over the years. The hammer of teaching experience malleates a philosophy until it is molded into something workable and uplifting. My high school band teacher was exceptional, but I quickly realized I would never sustain a career adopting his fundamentals. All teachers, music or other, would benefit from revising their philosophy of education statements periodically throughout their career. Do you still hold to Vygotsky's principles, or does perennial philosophy speak to you more? What we think about child development, the delivery of instruction, the means and necessity of fostering relationships and the community with administrators, and what types of assessments are most accurate and meaningful, all change with years of going into a classroom day after day. No teacher training professors could ever instill, before a career begins, one's philosophy of education. It's just not that most philosophies are gibberish, though all but one or two will seem so after a decade of teaching, and after 2 decades, you'll likely notice more philosophies working in unexpected ways. It's rather that fashioning a philosophy of, well, anything, before you have significant experience doing that thing is naive. Imagine being 22 and being asked to write a 1-page philosophy of disc golf without ever having seen or played the game. It is, however, beneficial for graduates to work on that 1-page philosophy of education statement, but they ought to know that it will change over time. If it doesn't, they're not thinking deeply about their life as a teacher. I've seen plenty of lemon teachers who indeed never considered deeply what it means to teach and what it means to learn, at least not since their university studies. But if you're reading this, it's likely you're not a lemon, or what they call today a quiet quitter. You, rather, despite the low pay and meaningless government testing regime, the difficult parents and unapt administrators, want to teach and to know why what you do works for students, and alternatively, when it doesn't, why it failed. For you, the practice of rewriting your 1-page philosophy of education statement would be a real advantage. I'm not saying to revisit the writings of Skinner or Dewey, Montessori or Rousseau, but just pick up your pen and put it to paper. Write down what you think is the nature of each student as a person and what they deserve from the educational system, how you fit into that as a teacher, and what you would make the school if you could change anything about it. What is the nature of the institution at a fundamental level, and what your students would gain from schools that they would most value in their as adult humans. Earning a PhD was a good experience for turning my mind to reflective teaching, but I might have accomplished the same thing in less time without having taken as many years as I did away from the public school system. I left and eventually returned to. I read about education before enrolling in Penn State in 2011, especially in the early years of Kindle, when you could download thousands of classic books for free. One book I read on Kindle, Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy, taught me as much about education as any of the educational philosophers I read at university. It is Jude's tragic bond with the ivory tower that spurred my critical thinking which led me to become a philosopher. Jude worked hard labor while he tried for years to gain admittance into Christminster. His Latin being better than the Christminster students he met was irrelevant because he did not have the social class to attend. Today, Christminster would admit him, but then release him to a life of servitude after he accrued $200,000 of debt. In today's world, the less intellectual students with the right social class still attend Christminsters of the world, and they get the jobs that pay the best over the classmates with better GPAs. Jalopies with Harvard and Yale bumper stickers are common enough on the highways. Without submitting yourself to Christminster's towers, lifelong learning is easier than ever. As a Catholic, I place certain prominence on philosophy, the oft-systematic scrutiny of the fundamentals of human experience, including the experience of education, because the Catholic intellectual tradition has placed philosophy at its core. When I see folk, non-religious or of other denominations and religions, who could care less about philosophy, it dumbfounds me. Don't you want to understand the world in which you dwell? Wrestling with wisdom is something that is manifestly human. It doesn't matter if you're a bus driver, teacher, doctor, bricklayer, or police officer. No employer has the power to stop you from thinking deeply about what you do. And as a result, to grow in understanding. No ivory tower needed, but a library card, a notebook, and some people to talk to are helpful.